Humans carved up the greyish flesh of the alien captain, devouring the choicest cuts raw to assert dominance over their captive. Just hours earlier, Dennis Webb, a grizzled ex-marine turned space pirate, led his boarding party onto the crippled Ullian freighter after detecting its distress signal. Although it reeked of a setup, the derelict ship was too tempting a prize to pass up. Makeshift weapons in hand, and wearing an eclectic mix of salvaged spacesuits, the ragtag human crew stalked through the freighter's murky labyrinthine halls. The twisting passageways and pulsing power conduits were unsettlingly alien, unlike any human vessel. "Life supports on the Fritz and not a soul in sight," rasped Zack, Dennis's wiry second-in-command. "Don't like this one bit." A spine-chilling scream rang out from deep within the ship. Rushing toward the sound, the pirates found a quivering Ullian, its exoskeleton oozing green ichor from deep cracks. In halting English, it introduced itself as Xander and begged for aid, raving about its crewmates going berserk and butchering one another. Dennis sensed a trap, but also a golden opportunity. If they could seize control of this alien ship and its valuable cargo, they'd be set for life. It was a now-or-never, do-or-die moment for the desperate human pirates. Venturing deeper into the eerie Ullian freighter, they soon stumbled into an otherworldly nightmare beyond human comprehension. Dennis and his crew ventured deeper into the alien vessel's eerie depths, with the limping Ullian survivor, Xander, as their reluctant guide. The air grew thick with an unnatural, fetid stench that seeped into their suits, causing stomachs to churn. Zack's hand tightened on his plasma cutter, knuckles white beneath his gloves. As they rounded a corner, a sealed chamber loomed before them. Its heavy door hung ajar, torn open from within by incredible force. Jagged metal edges glinted in the dim emergency lighting. Dennis exchanged a wary glance with Zack before stepping inside, boots crunching on shattered exoskeleton fragments strewn across the floor. The chamber was a scene of unimaginable carnage. Broken Ullian bodies lay strewn about, their chitinous shells cracked open and glistening innards partially devoured. Green ichor pooled beneath the corpses and splattered the walls. Zack recoiled, hand clasped over his mouth as he fought down the urge to vomit in his helmet. "Jesus," he gasped, "what the hell happened here?" Dennis's jaw clenched as he surveyed the grisly sight, but he pressed onwards, determined to uncover the truth behind this derelict vessel's fate. Xander chittered something in his alien tongue, gesturing for them to follow with a trembling claw. The bridge was not far. As they entered, Dennis's blood ran cold. There, still strapped into the command chair, sat the decapitated remains of the Ullian captain. His head was simply gone, ripped off with horrific force. Viscous fluids dribbled from the ragged stump of his neck. "Look," said Zack, pointing a shaky finger toward a flickering holographic display. "The ship's log." Dennis approached the screen, squinting to read the alien script as it auto-translated. His eyes widened as the chilling account unfolded before him. The Ullian crew, it seemed, had been experimenting with a radical new form of genetic manipulation in a bid to enhance their physical capabilities. But something had gone terribly wrong. The test subjects grew unnaturally strong and fast, their minds warping as a ravenous hunger for living flesh consumed them. Like a virus, the abominable condition spread rapidly through the ship. Crewmate turned on crewmate in an orgy of violence and cannibalism as the Ullians tore each other apart. Dennis looked down at Xander with newfound understanding and horror. "You're the sole survivor," he breathed. "But then—" An icy tendril of fear crept up Dennis's spine. Something still felt off, a nagging wrongness that set his nerves on edge. He turned to the ship's control panel, intent on overriding the lockdown and seizing command of the vessel. Behind him came a wet, tearing sound that froze the blood in his veins. Slowly dreading what he would see, Dennis turned back toward Xander. The Ullian twitched and spasmed, his segmented body convulsing grotesquely. With a sickening crack, his exoskeleton split open down the center, pale flesh bulging outward. Zack screamed. Dennis could only stare in transfixed revulsion as Xander's twisting, mutating form rose up before them, transformed into something monstrous and unspeakably hungry. Dennis stumbled back in abject terror, his mind reeling as the Ullion's body split open with a sickening wet crunch. The thing that emerged from the ruptured shell was a hulking mass of pulsating flesh, slick with viscous fluids. Bony protrusions jutted from its misshapen form at unnatural angles, and a gaping maw filled with jagged teeth split its head in a twisted mockery of a grin. "Open fire!" Zack screamed, his voice cracking with panic. The pirates unleashed a hail of plasma bolts and incendiary rounds at the abomination, but the creature barely flinched as the shots sizzled against its hide. With a bone-chilling screech it lunged forward, razor-sharp claws outstretched. "Fall back!" Dennis roared, shoving his crewmates toward the exit. They scrambled through the ship's winding corridors, the mutated Ullions' heavy footfalls and inhuman shrieks echoing behind them. Dennis slammed his fist against control panels as they ran, sealing bulkheads to slow the creature's relentless pursuit. At last, they burst into a dimly lit cargo hold, chests heaving and sweat-drenched. Dennis did a quick head count, his blood running cold as he realized they were several short. "Where's Mick and Jenna?" he demanded, searching his crew's haunted faces. A piercing scream ripped through the air, followed by the wet squelch of tearing flesh and the crunch of splintering bone. One by one, the missing crewmates staggered into the hold, their bodies hideously warped and twisted just like Xander's. Their faces, once so familiar, were now distorted masks of hunger, eyes glazed and jaws slack. They lurched forward, driven by an insatiable need to feed. With a sinking feeling of dread, Dennis realized they had no choice but to cut down their former comrades. The cargo hold erupted into a cacophony of gunfire, screams, and the wet rending of flesh as the remaining humans fought for their lives against the creatures that had once been their friends. In the chaos, Dennis found himself separated from the others, his weapon clicking empty as he backed into the ship's mess hall. There, amidst the scattered remnants of half-eaten meals, he spotted a discarded datapad, its screen still glowing. With trembling hands, he picked it up and began to read, his eyes widening in horrified realization. The Ullions' genetic experiments had not been solely for military might, but for a far more sinister purpose. The mutations allowed them to extract and process the unique nutrients found in human bodies with terrifying efficiency. The crew's hunger was not just for flesh, but for the very essence of humanity itself. Bile rising in his throat, Dennis knew he had to find a way off this accursed ship and warn the rest of humankind about the Ullions' dark secret. The fate of his species hung in the balance, and time was running out. Dennis clutched the datapad in a white-knuckled grip as he raced through the ship's labyrinthine corridors, his heart pounding in his ears. He had to find the others, warn them of the Ullions' true intentions before it was too late. The sound of heavy footsteps and inhuman screeches echoed behind him, spurring him on. He burst into the cargo hold, startling the survivors. They whirled to face him, weapons raised but lowered them as recognition dawned. "Dennis, thank God," Zack rasped, his face pale and slick with sweat. "What the hell is going on?" "No time to explain," Dennis panted, thrusting the datapad into Zack's hands. "Read this. We need to get off this ship and blow it to hell." As Zack scanned the pad, his expression morphed from confusion to revulsion to grim determination. He looked up, meeting Dennis's gaze. "All right," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "What's the plan?" They huddled together, speaking in low, urgent tones as the sounds of the mutated Ullions drew closer. The ship's reactor core was their best bet, overloaded, and the whole vessel would be vaporized, but they needed an escape route first. "The escape pods," Dennis said, a glimmer of hope in his voice. "If we can reach them, modify one to fit us." Zack nodded, jaw set. "We'll have to split up. One team to rig the reactor, the other to secure our ride out of here." Dennis clasped Zack's shoulder, a gesture of trust and camaraderie. "I'll find us a pod. You take the reactor. We'll meet back here." They divided the remaining crew, arming themselves with whatever weapons they could scavenge. Dennis led his group out of the cargo hold, navigating the twisted corridors with a mixture of caution and haste. The eerie green emergency lighting cast distorted shadows on the walls, and every distant sound made them flinch. At last they reached the escape pod bay. Dennis's heart sank as he saw the pods, their contours sleek and alien. They were designed for Ullian physiology, not human. "We'll make it work," he growled, determination etched into every line of his face. "Start ripping out seats, consoles, whatever we don't need. We'll jury-rig this thing if we have to." His team set to work, using tools and brute strength to modify the pod. Sparks flew and metal screeched as they tore into the Ullian technology, sweat dripping down their faces. All the while, Dennis kept a wary eye on the door, plasma rifle at the ready. On the other side of the ship, Zack and his team fought their way to the reactor core. The mutated Ullians seemed to sense their intent, throwing themselves at the humans with redoubled ferocity. Claws raked against metal, and the air was filled with the stench of blood and burned flesh. They reached the reactor, a pulsing mass of alien energy. Zack planted the explosives with shaking hands, setting the timer. As they turned to leave, a horde of mutants burst into the chamber, screeching and slavering. Zack and his team opened fire, the confined space lit by strobing muzzle flashes and sizzling plasma bolts. But for every creature they cut down, 2 more seemed to take its place. They were being overwhelmed, beaten back by the relentless tide of mutated flesh. Zack locked eyes with his remaining crewmates, a final wordless goodbye. With a roar of defiance, he primed a grenade and charged forward, vanishing into the seething mass of mutants. A heartbeat later, the explosion rocked the ship, a blinding flash of light and heat. In the escape pod bay, Dennis heard the distant boom and felt his stomach drop. Zack, the timer was counting down. They had to leave now. With a final, desperate heave, Dennis slammed the escape pod's hatch shut, just as the mutated Ullians reached it, their claws scrabbling against the reinforced metal. The pod shuddered as it launched, the force of the acceleration pressing the survivors back into their makeshift seats. Through the small viewport, they watched as the Ullian ship receded, explosions blossoming along its hull as the reactor went critical. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the ragged breathing of the exhausted crew. Then a cheer went up, a primal release of fear and adrenaline. They had made it. They were alive. But their elation was short-lived. As the pod drifted away from the expanding debris field, a new shape emerged from the wreckage, another Ullian vessel, sleek and predatory. It moved with purpose, drawn by the distress signal of its doomed sister ship. Dennis felt a cold dread settle in his gut. The nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. The Ullians would stop at nothing to keep their grisly secret hidden, and now he and his crew were the only ones who knew the truth. "We have to warn them," he said, his voice hoarse. "Everyone, the whole damn human race." The others nodded, their faces grim. Dennis inputted coordinates for the nearest human outpost, a small mining colony on the fringes of explored space. The pod shuddered again as it changed course, its damaged engines straining. As they limped through the void, systems began to fail one by one. Life support sputtered, the air growing thin and stale. Power dwindled, leaving them in near darkness. But still, they pressed on, driven by a desperate need to deliver their warning. The outpost appeared on their scanners, a tiny pinprick of light against the infinite black. Dennis guided the crippled pod toward it, fighting to keep them on course. The hull heated up as they hit the atmosphere, the metal groaning under the strain. With a bone-jarring impact, they hit the ground, skidding across the rocky surface in a shower of sparks and debris. The pod came to a rest, smoke rising from its ruined engines. Silence? Then a groan. Dennis lifted his head, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. Around him, the bodies of his crew lay still, broken and lifeless. He was alone, the sole survivor. With trembling hands, he reached into his pocket and withdrew the data drive, the precious cargo that had cost so many lives. He had to get it to the outpost, had to make their sacrifice mean something. He stumbled from the wreckage, the data drive clutched to his chest. In the distance he could see figures running towards him, human soldiers in familiar uniforms. A wave of relief washed over him. But as he opened his mouth to call out, a searing pain erupted in his back. He staggered, the data drive falling from his grasp. He turned, his vision blurring, to see a figure emerging from the shadows behind him. A human wearing an unfamiliar uniform. On their sleeve, a patch depicting a stylized alien skull. The figure bent down, picking up the data drive. With a cold, almost casual motion, they crushed it beneath their boot. As Dennis collapsed, the taste of blood in his mouth, the horrifying realization dawned on him. The Ulians had already infiltrated human society, their influence running deeper than anyone could have imagined. His eyes stared up at the stars, unseeing, as the last breath left his body. A silent warning unheeded, as humanity continued on, blissfully unaware of the danger that now lurked among them. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.